Hey everyone, today I will be doing an update on my experience with formal voice therapy. I've already done a video on my experience with changing my voice and sort of self-training altogether. So if you haven't seen that, I'd recommend watching that first. I'll summarize everything that I was taught within formal voice therapy, and I'll sort of give my opinions on it and give an overview of my experience as a whole. My particular experience was from a 6-week course provided from my provincial healthcare system, and it was run out of a hospital. There was an in-person session before and after that exclusively measured pitch, but aside from that, everything else was group sessions and online. The first week focused on vocal hygiene and breathing. Vocal hygiene largely encompassed all the best practices for keeping your voice and vocal cords as healthy as possible. It went over a bunch of stuff such as hydration, sleeping enough, not over speaking, not yelling or cheering, not whispering, and all the other stuff that sort of harms your vocal cords in a way that prevents progress and hurts how far you're able to push your vocal cords and how much you're able to change them. It also went over certain irritants such as smoke, dust, certain foods or drinks that hurt your vocal cords. And it had also taught the practice of abdominal breathing, which is sort of a technique to maximize the amount of breath support behind your speech. As I had mentioned in the previous video, I do have acid reflux, and I sort of was led to believe that there would be a solution or practices that they would propose to help with that, and I basically was told that medications exist for it and there isn't a good long-term solution, but I couldn't expect much more than that. The second and third week went over resonance, and these were the most beneficial sessions for me. I'm not an expert on the different forms of resonance, but I believe there are several, and this course had just focused on one type, which was the resonance that occurs within your mouth, and it mainly just taught you how to feel for where your resonance is and push it to the front of your mouth. It started with straws and water, and then it transitioned over into humming, and then after that we did sort of sounds, consonants and vowels, and then we just did full sentences or words, and sort of just pushed the resonance further and how long it could be maintained. It absolutely helped me find the spots in my mouth where I need to feel for and which muscles to use, but I don't think overall it drastically changed my voice in any sort of way, and you can cross-reference between videos to figure it out for yourself. In the fourth week, the course covered pitch and inflection. While I was already fairly comfortable with my pitch, there wasn't really any effort to teach the other women in the course how to raise their pitch in any significant way. It sort of just gave the other women the goal of raising their pitch, but it didn't really actually instruct them in anything other than telling them to not try to raise it too high too fast because it can hurt their inflection. On the other hand, they went into a lot of detail on inflection. They went over the sort of steps of inflection in linguistics and a bunch of stuff like that, and it was practiced for a long period within class. But there was no real effort on what made pitch gendered. It was more so just put as much inflection into it as possible and not anything about what are feminine inflections. Week 5 went over female mannerisms, and this is where the course took a huge dive and had the potential to cause a lot of harm. While the course was led by a cis woman, and she was at times critical of some of the ideas that were proposed, most of the time she worked to reinforce them and would tend to imply ignorance on the person who questioned them. Sometimes this questioning would lean into the extent of questioning the person's womanhood. Other times the questioning was a lot more targeted and direct, and she'd ask them, maybe it's something you need to work on, and it was just overall inappropriate at points. Many of these mannerisms that we were taught heavily relied on racist, classist, heteronormative assumptions, and of course sexism as well. While some mannerisms were of course accurate descriptions, this was not the case for all of them. There were sections that condemned racially coded language as masculine and antithetical to womanhood. I personally saw a lot of parallels to sort of discussions I've heard from critical race theorists who talk about how Black people are expected to talk in formal settings, but that's not necessarily a topic I'm equipped to discuss myself. It also conformed to an upper white middle class standard of politeness, and a lot of the low and middle class mannerisms were outwardly condemned. It was heteronormative in how it condemned queer forms of expression to be antithetical to womanhood, and it had assumed that like every male-female interaction is a romantic one, and that women largely don't interact with anyone outside of heterosexual relationships. They would occasionally use female-female relationships as friendships, but they were often coded in a lot of sexist ideas. Many of the sexist ideas that were taught were that women couldn't have any interests revolving around cars, sports, or any other like masculine recreation, and that the interests that they could have were entirely revolved around domestic labor. We were taught to limit our vocabulary around like automotive terms or sports terms, but we were taught that we were supposed to know an infinite amount of colors and other stuff. It argued that women don't discuss anything of importance with their friends, and that women's emotions are one of those things that's not of any importance. It argued that women shouldn't be allowed to express their needs directly. It argued that women shouldn't be able to talk more than is necessary. And even the last point of the page was that women don't tell jokes well, and that they often don't understand the punchlines of jokes. The last week focused on nonverbal communication. It outlined the different types of nonverbal communication and then gave examples of masculine and feminine manners of nonverbal communication. Most of these were generally correct, but they were just argued to such a cartoonish extent that made them ultimately meaningless. One of the examples on posture had stated that women typically stand with all their weight on one foot, with their hip jutted out, and then their hand on their hip. And I do not know any time I've seen a woman casually resting like that to that extent outside of like a cartoon. Though it is the case that women on average are more likely to lean their weight to one side rather than have it equally placed, it's just argued to such a cartoonish extent that it's blatantly wrong and ridiculous. During the week, they had also gone over eye contact, and they had told me that it wasn't like a gendered thing to any extent, so I don't know why they had included it. I had repeatedly explained to the instructor that I was quite uncomfortable with discussing my level of eye contact and how to have it corrected, because I've got trauma related to having it forcefully corrected as a child due to being autistic. But the instructor had continued to pry into me and continue asking me, which was not really okay. To summarize, I don't think there's a huge difference in my voice by any extent, though I think my confidence in my voice, or at least comfort and having a sense of safety, has increased, knowing that I'm not missing out on voice therapy anymore. I know what it was like, and I learned everything, even if it didn't especially benefit me. Though there were numerous issues with how the course was conducted, and I especially noticed them with how the instructor treated the other trans women. There was a point where all of us had to record our pitch and sort of tell everyone in the class, which ranked all of us by our voice quality. And there wasn't a reason at all that it was needed, because in the private sessions, both before and after, it was already recorded and the numbers weren't used for anything. These comparisons were entirely unsolicited and quite inappropriate once you're dealing with people's insecurities and feelings of safety. There were women in the course that had fairly lower voices than other women, and I could imagine that that would be a very dysphoric experience. There were times where women had mentioned that they weren't dysphoric about a certain aspect, or that they had no interest in working on a certain aspect, and the instructor would pry them in a way that would imply that they should be working on it. It also reinforced a lot of really harmful ideas of gender roles. I also personally experienced issues of accessibility. There were sections of the course that greatly contributed to my sensory overwhelm and negatively impacted my ability to participate in the course. My autistic traits were outwardly condemned within the course, and there was overall a large insensitivity to me having visual disability and being able to read at certain portions of the course. They also combined the forms that assess your need for voice therapy with the forms that assess their performance in improving your voice therapy, and it felt like quite a dishonest way to boost the significance of their work. This is because the trans woman would be encouraged to rank themselves artificially low at the start of the course so that they would be able to get in. Overall, this wasn't a fairly negative experience. I had learned a lot of things, but there certainly were a lot of shortcomings of the course. This also certainly doesn't represent voice therapy as a whole, but it's a voice therapy course that I had personally went through, and I wanted to share my personal experiences. I also think it serves to demonstrate the potential harms that can come from having these trans spaces exclusively constructed by cis people. I think that self-teaching is a very good option for voice therapy if you're able to do it yourself. And I think if you've got the option to choose to learn under other trans people, trans spaces, of course, still do need a lot of work, especially when they're constructed under cis medicalizations that are distant from actually understanding the trans experience. I hope you enjoyed this video and that it was informative for you. And if you've gone through formal voice therapy, I'd love to hear your experience. Or even if you're self-trained, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this overall. And feel free to follow along if you'd like more content like this. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later.